This video is brought to you by Envato Elements.
Vector and raster in one app, a fully featured iPad app, and you can even open Adobe files. Best of all, there's no subscription required. Affinity Designer 2 is here, and I'm going to show you everything that you need to know to get started. I'm Drew, and I've been teaching design for more than 5 years. Check out my work over at moonlab.studio or dramaxstudio.com. Let's have a look at the interface in Affinity Designer 2 and just kind of get our bearings and see where things are. Up here at the top, you have your menus that you're probably used to from any other app. If you're on Mac, you're also going to have this Affinity Designer 2 menu where you're going to find things like about information. You can find the version that you have installed. You can switch personas, and you can also find your settings here. Now, if you're on Windows, settings is going to be under the edit menu. But from the settings menu, you can go in here and control your color management, performance. You can also find your shortcuts here and customize those to your liking. I'm going to leave this stuff as the default because the default works perfectly well for me, and it'll be simpler for you to get started. And we're just going to go ahead and close that out. Of course, the file menu manages importing new files, exports, and things like that. Edit is where we're going to find things like our paste controls, autofill, and where we can set up defaults. Text, we'll get into more when we work on our text project, but this is where you're going to find controls for your character traits, size, spacing, things like that that you don't find on the character panel. The layer menu is probably one of the most powerful menus in Affinity Designer 2 when it comes to working with objects. Select is also a really powerful menu where you can select things based on type, by fill color, by stroke color. You can also select things by name and even set up tags and groups of things to select them all at once without having to have them in a group in a layer stack. The view menu is where you're going to find things that pertain to the interface like guides, rulers, and things like that. The window menu is a really handy place to manage the interface with all of our different panels and things like that floating around. If you ever lose a panel and you can't find it, just check on the window menu. You can see which panels are open by looking for the little check mark here. We can see that the color panel is currently open. And if I go over here on the right side of the screen, we can see that this color panel is open. It's a tab in this group of other panels. We can drag these panels off and close them. So if I drag color out and close it like that, we can go back up to window and see that color is closed, and now there's no longer a check mark next to it. So all we have to do to bring that back is just select it here, and it will bring it back and put it exactly where it was when we closed it. I'm just going to drag that tab back over into the group with all the other tabs. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and reset my studio to the default studio because that's really going to work well for what we're doing. It's also going to make it simpler for you to find things on a fresh install of Affinity Designer. So I'm going to go to Window menu, go to Studio, and this is the place where we can save presets and things like that. But I'm just going to click Reset Studio, and you can see it's closed all that stuff that I had docked on the left side of the screen, and it's brought back our default set of panels. The help menu is also really handy. You can see we've got quick links for video tutorials and things like that, and the quick start guide as well as the online help and documentation. In macOS, we also have this little search bar. So if I type in something that I want to find in the menu, say color, it's going to show me every instance where that word shows up in the menus. And we can just click on it from here to actually select that in the menu. The command bars are the two bars up here at the top. Now, right now, the context bar doesn't have anything on it because that depends on what we have selected and what tool we have active. Right now, there's nothing open, so this is just going to be blank. But above that, we've got this main bar, and that one stays the same no matter what we're working on. Over here on the left, we've got our three personas. We have the designer persona, which is kind of the main heart of Affinity Designer. That's where we're going to do most of our work and work with vectors like that. We've got the pixel persona, which is great for sketching and painting. I personally use it more on the iPad app. And then we have the export persona. And once we have our document created and we need to export it for lots of different screens or for UI work or something like that, we can do that from the export persona. You'll notice each persona has a slightly different menu up here at the top, but a lot of the tools are the same. We'll quickly go over some of the options here in the designer persona. First, we've got the synchronize defaults and revert defaults, so we can create kind of defaults from whatever we have selected just to quickly use and reuse things right here. We also have our pixel view, our retina pixel view, and our wireframe view mode. This is really, really handy for troubleshooting and seeing how things are laid out without having to turn the color off and turn the color back on, or have things interfering with what we're looking at. Next, we have the arrangement buttons. We can move things around in the layer stack, so move to front, move to back. I typically use keyboard shortcuts for this, but if you want to use buttons, they are right here, or you can just drag things around in the layer stack. In the middle, we've got our document name will show up here, and also the zoom percentage. Since I don't have anything open, it just says Affinity Designer 2. Next, we've got some quick transform controls. These are really handy for when you want to flip something horizontally or vertically, or just rotate things in 90-degree increments. I do tend to use keyboard shortcuts for the rotation, but it can be really handy for the flip horizontal and vertical. This is the alignment panel. This is actually a drop-down menu where we have different alignment options, so we can quickly center things or justify a bunch of objects to the left or right. We can even use this panel to set things up so that they take up all of the space of a given selection. And when we get into our project, you'll see just how much stuff is on that drop-down panel. Next, we have our snap setting. So we can force pixel alignment. We can also move by whole pixels. This is going to be handy when we're working with vectors, but we want to make sure that they look correct when we export them to a pixel format or raster format. And then we have our snapping buttons. This just activates snapping, turns it on and off. And right next to that, we have a little drop-down menu. Right now, it doesn't do anything because I don't have a document open, but this has entire presets for different things that we might be working on, whether it's UI work or layout or object creation and drawing and things like that. And we also have the ability to fine-tune exactly what we're snapping to. So we don't have to kind of mess around with it snapping to things that we don't want it to snap to. Next, we have our Boolean operations. These are destructive operations, and I'm going to show you when we get into the project both these and a non-destructive Boolean operation that we can do. But we've got basic Boolean operations here: add and subtract, intersect, either or. Finally, we have the insert controls, and I use this quite a bit because this just makes it really quick to create objects without having to worry about where they go in the layer stack. Depending on whatever you have selected, you can either insert above that in the layer stack, you can insert below or behind that in the layer stack, or you can insert it so that it clips to that selection. And we'll get into clipping things a lot in Affinity Designer.
This video is brought to you by Envato Elements, the largest unlimited creative subscription in the world. Get seriously creative. Click the link to learn more.
So let's get started with our first document. We'll go up to the File menu, and we'll go to New. And on this screen, you can see there's a whole bunch of options over here on the left. We have options for opening things, our recent. We also have templates that we can save. We've got samples. The samples are handy if you want to just look at things and see kind of how to reverse engineer projects. But we're going to go back to New, and we're going to use one of the web presets. The presets that it's given us will control not only the document size, but also the units and the color model that it uses. If I go to Press Ready, for instance, and click on A3, we can see that it's going to give us millimeters for units, and it's going to give us CMYK for color, assuming that we're going to print it. If I switch to letter instead, go back to layout, we can see that it's going to give us inches instead of millimeters, but it's still going to keep that CMYK color model. For this project, we're going to be making a social media story post. I'm going to scroll down through the different presets to web, and I'm just going to select social media story post. Now, typically a story post is going to be portrait format, so we can adjust that up here, the top, and I'm just going to set that to portrait orientation. We can see our units are in pixels. We've got a page width of 1080 pixels and a height of 1920. The DPI is also visible here. It's 144. Since we're not printing that, I'm not going to worry about that. And color is going to automatically be set to RGB, which is just fine. I'm not going to be using margin or bleed or anything like that, but you can set that up here if you want to. Going back to the layout tab, we also have an option for create artboard. I'm going to leave that turned off for now because I'm going to show you how to create an artboard once we've started the document. So let's go ahead and click create. As we work on this project, I'm going to be going through all the different tools on the left side here, and we're going to touch on each of the panels kind of as we go through the project. Before we start with anything though, it is probably good to have a look at the history panel. I'm going to drag that out so that we can see it. And we'll start off with the first tool, which is the Create Artboard tool. Now, there are a few different ways to create artboards, and the easiest, obviously, is just the Insert Artboard button. If I click that, it's turned our document into an artboard. And I can click this as many times as I want. So we'll click it a couple more times there. And we can see here in the history that we've created 3 artboards. Let's zoom out. I'm going to use the trackpad on my laptop to do that, but you can also use the Command key to pan up and down with your mouse wheel. You can hold spacebar to pan around the document like this, and you can use the Option or the Alt key on Windows to zoom in and out like that. So we can see that we've got 3 artboards here. If I go back one state in history, we've got this little slider that we can use, but then we can also just click on these different states. I'm going to go back one state, and instead of creating a 3rd artboard that's the same size as the first one here, we're going to create a custom-sized artboard. So I've still got the Artboard tool active, and I'm just going to click and drag. And I'm going to hold Shift to keep that proportional. So we've got 2 artboards that are these kind of tall story portrait rectangles, and then we've got 1 square artboard. And you can see up here in the history panel, it's got this new little icon on that second state, which is called the Cycle Future button. If you've ever worked with something like GitHub, you might be familiar with this. Basically, we've got a fork where we can go back and we can choose which version we want to go forward with. So I'm going to go back to the Cycle Future, and you can see that we've got that tall artboard instead. If I go click on that button again, you can see now we've got back to that square artboard. This is really, really powerful. And if you're used to other apps like Illustrator, you might just assume that when you undo and then do something different, it's going to throw away that history, but it actually does keep this history in here. It does count against your history states and your performance settings. So if you don't have a whole lot of memory on your computer, you're going to find this is a little bit limited, but this can be really, really powerful. When you're trying things out, you don't have to go back and redo things and over and over and over again, or make multiple copies of the same artboard to see how things are going to work. You can just use this history fork and Cycle Future. I'm going to go ahead and go back to this first artboard I created, and we'll dock history back down here where it was next to Navigator. In order to fit this artboard to the screen so it takes up as much of the screen as possible, you can just hit Command 0 or Control 0 on Windows. As I'm doing these keyboard shortcuts, you'll also notice that they show up down here at the bottom of my screen. This is the Command key, Shift, Option, and Control. Next, we're going to use the Place tool to get some references in here. I use Envato Elements myself because it's a flat monthly rate, and it saves me a ton of time to have high-quality assets ready whenever I need them. I put together a collection over on Envato Elements, so check out the link in the description to get those assets. Click on the Place Image tool, and that's going to open our Finder or Explorer on Windows. I'm just going to drag all of the images that I've collected for this project and click Open. It loads up this little stack where we can select which image we want to place. And as I place these, it'll remove them from the queue. So I'm just going to click and drag a little box. So I want that image about there. You can see it is snapping for me because I've got that snapping active. And currently my snapping, I don't have a preset active. I just have it set to snap to object bounding boxes, snap to shape key points, and snap to object geometry. And it's also set to only snap to visible objects. And this just lets me quickly place these images in here. If I just click once, it's going to place it at full size, which I don't want to do. So I'll Command Z to undo that. Control Z on Windows. And I'm just going to place these about like that. You can see that it's removing them from the stack as I go. This one actually got placed on the artboard, so let's do that. And there we go. Now that we've imported the images, let's have a look at the Move tool. This is kind of analogous to the Select tool in Illustrator. It's the black arrow. Is the very first one on our toolbar. It's V on the keyboard, which you can see by holding the mouse cursor over that tool. And you don't want to confuse that with the white arrow, which is the node tool, specifically for working with vector objects. Here, we can select multiple objects by holding Shift, or we can also drag a box around them. Now that we have a selection active, we can transform them using the handles on the corner or the handles in the middle. These will constrain to certain axes. So if I only want to scale on the x-axis, I can use those handles on the side. If I want to scale on both x and y at the same time, I can use one of the corner handles. If we want to keep things proportional, just hold Shift. If you want to scale from the center of your selection, hold the Command key or Control on Windows. I'm going to undo that. We can also rotate using this little handle at the top. Or if you just move your mouse cursor slightly outside of the selection near one of these corners, you can also rotate like that. When rotating, Control will rotate based on the opposite corner handle rather than rotating around the center, which can be really, really handy. Using the Shift key will also constrain your rotation, so you're only going to rotate in 15-degree increments. We'll have a look at some of the options up here on our command bar as well. So we can quickly group our selection if we want to do that. And you can see it creates a group in the layer stack. Auto select basically just lets us select things in the interface. So if you don't want to accidentally deselect or select the wrong thing, you can turn off auto select, and then you have to select things in the layer stack. It won't let you select it in the interface. I'm just going to hold Shift and select these images that I have in the layer stack. We'll turn auto select back on because it's generally handy to have that active. You can also control what it auto selects to. So you can auto select by default, which is everything, or you can constrain that to objects or groups. Here we have some controls for how it's going to transform. So we can enable the origin here, and it's kind of hard to see, but we get this little blue circle, and wherever we put that, that's where it's going to rotate and scale around. So if I go in here and rotate this group of images, you can see it's rotating around that origin. It's going to do the same thing with scale. So if I want to scale to a specific spot, it's going to scale all of those images based on that origin. It is worth noting that when you scale things, it's going to move that origin with respect to the new scale of the object. So it's not going to scale directly to it. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to turn that off. This button is the hide selection while dragging. If we activate that, whenever we drag our selection around, you can see it hides all those interface lines, the bounding box, and the handle tools in the corners. So it just makes it a little bit easier to see exactly what it's lining up with and where we're dropping things. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off, and you can see it does have those lines now. Next, we've got the show alignment handles, and this can be really handy for making fine adjustments or working with multiple things and making sure that they get positioned exactly where you want them. We'll turn that back off. And finally, we have the transform objects separately. When I turn that on and drag the handle of one of these, rather than dragging the entire group around its common center, it's going to rotate each image around its own center. This can be really useful when you're trying to get things, multiple transforms all exactly the same without having to do them all individually. So if you want to take a whole bunch of things and rotate them exactly 15 degrees, you can just select them all, enable that setting, and then just rotate the images holding shift. So that we've got 30 degrees. I'm going to hit undo to go back. The pen tool is the heart of any vector drawing application, and the pen tool in Affinity Designer is pretty similar to the one in apps like Adobe Illustrator, with a few notable exceptions. We've got the pen tool active here in the toolbar, and in the top in our context menu, we can see we've got options for the fill and stroke, and also a drop down for stroke options. Then we have some different modes. I'm mostly going to be using just pen mode, but there are a couple here like smart mode. It's great for creating organic shapes. It gives you automatic curves. There's also polygon mode, which even if you click and drag, which normally creates a curve, it just repositions your corner and only gives you corners. There's also line mode, which only creates straight lines and doesn't actually close any of those shapes. Then we also have a few options for preserve selection and creating new curves. So if you want to have everything selected at the end when you're done, you can turn that on and it will, instead of deselecting and creating a new shape, it will automatically keep that selection on. We also have add new curve to selected curves object. This will basically just create a compound shape with a bunch of curves all in one layer in the layer stack. You can play around with these options and mess with them, but again, I'm primarily just going to be using pen mode and the keyboard shortcuts. These options over here are also common to the node tool, so we'll get into these options when we work with the node tool. But let's go ahead and draw our iceberg using just corners. So for corners, with the pen mode active, you just have to click once and it will create a corner. You can click and drag with pen mode active and that'll create a curve. And you can also option, or if you're in Windows, Alt click on those points that you've created before, and it'll turn them back into corners. Now, I want all corners for this top of this iceberg. So I'm just going to click once and click again and click again. If you want to reposition these points, you can Command click on them and drag. So hold Command and click and drag these points to reposition them. If you're doing curves, as long as the curve is still active, you still have your mouse button held down, you can just hold spacebar and reposition it. But again, I want to have all corners for this, so I'm just going to hold the Alt key and click that to get rid of that curve and make sure it's just a corner. We'll add a couple more. And then to close this shape, you can either hold the mouse over the very first point, or you can go up here and click this little button for close curve. This is really handy when you have a ton of curves on the screen and you're having trouble getting it to click on exactly the point that you want. So this can be fast to just go ahead and close your curve. Now, if you want to reposition the points, you can temporarily activate the node tool by just holding Command. So holding Command allows you to click and drag and gives you a lot of the same controls that you would have with the node tool. You even have the ability to adjust the curves by dragging on lines like this. You have the ability to hold Command and Option to turn these back into corners. You can also hold Command to select them and then just use these buttons up here to turn them into corners. So if I drag that out and drag that out, hold Command and drag a selection around all those nodes, I can just click that sharp button to turn them back into corners. So as we're working with this, you can quickly change between the pen and the node tool by just holding the Command key or Control on Windows. I'm going to reposition these points. One thing that takes a little bit of getting used to is that when you want to move multiple points at the same time, you have to hold Command and Shift to get multiple points, and then release Shift, hold Command, and move them around. If you still hold Shift, it's not necessarily going to work. So you want to just release Shift and just hold Command. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to duplicate this shape. So I'm going to go back to the Move tool or Select tool by hitting V on the keyboard, and I want to duplicate it, so I'm going to hold the Option key and click and drag that shape. You can see that creates a copy of the shape here. And it's good to get in the habit of naming these, so we'll call this the top iceberg. Now that we have our two shapes here, we can go ahead and fill in the body of the iceberg as well. So I'm going to go back to the pen tool or hit P on the keyboard. And I want to make sure that snapping is enabled so that I'm snapping to these existing points. So I'm going to click the little magnet button up here, and to make sure that we're snapping to the correct things, I'm going to click this drop down, and I can use a preset. So we have things like curve drawing and object creation. Curve drawing is what I want, but I'm also going to enable a couple of other options here. By default for curve drawing, it's only going to snap to object geometry. So if I mouse over this, you can see where it's snapping to the geometry, but it's not snapping to the corner points. So let's go ahead and click this drop down again. I want it to snap to shape key points. And we'll go ahead and enable snap to object bounding boxes as well. So turn that off, and now you can see it is snapping to these points as well. So click here once, and again, all these are just going to be corners. So I'm just going to quickly kind of click through here and create a rough shape of the iceberg. The shape doesn't have to be perfect. We will come back later and fine tune it with the node tool. But now I'm just going to close this shape, and you can see what I mean about having these points exactly on other points. So I can just click this button to close that shape. Next, I'm going to draw the bear, and I've kind of a couple of references here for what I want the bear to look like, these kind of abstracted forms here. So for that, there's going to be a lot of curves and some corners. So it's going to get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm using the trackpad. You can also use the Option key and your mouse wheel to zoom in, and the space bar. Just hold the space bar and click and drag to pan around your document. So for the feet, I'm going to start with corners and then use a curve for the back. Use another curve up here for the shoulder, and then a corner here for the ear, and another few corners. Go ahead and turn snapping off so it doesn't snap to points that I don't want it to. And I'm just doing all corners for the face because it's a little bit easier to get them in position and then go and add any kind of curvature that I want. We'll go ahead and keep this pretty geometric. Now that I've got the shape roughly in place, I can see the head is a little bit small. So let's go ahead and fix this with the node tool. The node tool has a lot of familiar options up here at the top. We've got the convert to sharp, smooth, and smart. Then we also have actions for splitting the curves, breaking the curves, smoothing curves, etc. We also have a transform bounding box, which is really, really handy. We'll use that in a second. And then we have some additional snapping buttons here that you can use for snapping points to each other along the same curve without activating the snapping for the entire document. This will only work on the selected curve. I'm not going to be using those for now, but I will go ahead and use this transform box. Let's go ahead and select all these points on the head since it's a little bit small. We'll click the transform mode. You can see we get all of the same controls that we had for the move tool. And I'm just going to use the transform mode as is so I can scale these up. We also can use the same hotkeys. So like command will scale. I'm just going to drag this corner handle up to scale it up. We can rotate the head a little bit. You can see how handy this transform bounding box is when you're working with multiple points all at once. You can scale this in a couple of different dimensions, and this way I don't have to go in and move each of these points individually. It's really, really fast to work with. Next up is the corner tool. We're going to skip past the contour tool for now and come back to that a little bit later. And we're going to use this corner tool to add some curvature down here in the bottom of the bear. This is different than adding curvature with individual nodes because it's a little bit easier to manage since we're adding curves to these points, and then the curve is going to stay pretty much the same regardless of where we move the point or how we move it around. So let's have a look at how that works. want to add just a little bit of curvature here to the belly. So for instance, I'm just going to click and drag on the belly. You can see we've got this nice kind of perfect symmetrical curve here. We don't need to worry about having multiple points or how those Bezier handles are going to interact with other nodes. The curve only applies to that one corner point. And we've got multiple different corner types up here as well. So we have, by default, the just rounded corner. We can also change that to a concave corner and give him a little bit of a belly here. We can just adjust how much gets applied there. It's a really, really fast way to work, since now we don't have to work with multiple Bezier handles per point. We just have this one point. So I'm going to use the rounded corner there. I'm also going to add a rounded corner to the neck, and to each of the feet, we're going to add a little bit of a rounded edge. It's a bit hard to see, so I'm just going to zoom in here. I'm just going to round that one out, around each of these a little bit, and then I can go in with the node tool and fix them later. But for now, I'm just going to round all of these a little bit. And this is also nice because it gives me a lot of control for exactly how rounded they are. So some of them I can keep fairly sharp. Others, I can go ahead and add a lot of roundness. I'm going to hit Command 0 to zoom back out. Let's go back to the node tool. I'm going to hit A on the keyboard for the node tool. You can see that each of these have little circles around them telling me that they have corner adjustments applied, whereas these up here don't. It's also worth pointing out that the circular nodes are curves, but all of the square nodes are corners. So even though they're curved, they're still showing us square nodes inside of a circle. So when I move these around, you can see that the curve moves with it. And this is just a really, really quick way to add that curvature without having to manage a bunch of Bezier handles. Let's move this back a little bit. You can also add points with the node tool. I'm just going to add a point there and then drag this out so I create a little bit of a curve for the front foot. We'll do the same thing there. Let's move that corner up just a little bit, and then we can drag this out. So we've got another little curve for that back foot. Now, if I want to add some curvature to these, I can just pop back into the corner tool, click and drag on those to add a bit of curvature. Now, if I bake appearance is going to basically just turn these into Bezier curves. We can go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to select everything with Command A and click Bake Appearance. You can see now it's created all of these little points, and you can see just how much we would have to manage to create all of these different curves, which I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to Command Z to undo, and I'm just going to keep that procedural curvature. Hit Command 0 to zoom out again. I'm going to go back to the Move tool and just click off of this. We can see our shapes are coming together. We're going to need to add some color to this soon. But first, I need to start kind of grouping some of these shapes together so that I can add that curvature. Let's also name the bear, and we'll call this bottom iceberg. The pencil tool is a great option for designers who find the pen tool a little bit tedious or who just want a more natural look. I'm going to be using the pencil tool with my Wacom tablet here, but you can also use it with a mouse and keyboard. The pencil tool basically draws vector shapes with a click and drag or with pen input. You can set stroke color, and you can also set the fill and set the width of stroke, all using pen pressure, or you can do it later on through the stroke panel, and I'll show you how to do that. Pencil tool also has sculpt mode, which is really, really handy, but it can be a bit confusing at times when you first start using it. Basically, it lets you additively or subtractively tweak your shape all with your pen. We're going to do a little bit of setup first before we use the pencil tool, and we'll of course need some color, and I'm going to add some color to this polar bear to start with. Activate the Move tool, or hit V on the keyboard to activate Move tool. Make sure that the polar bear shape is selected. Make sure that your color panel is also visible. And if you don't see color panel, you can always find that on the window menu and make sure that it's checked here. The color panel has an eyedropper to use that, you basically just click on that icon and then drag, and you can see it's creating this little magnifying glass. And we can see which pixel it's going to be selecting from. And I'm going to use this image in the bottom left here with the iceberg and getting something gray from those clouds there. Once you have the color sampled, you need to apply it. So there's the color sample here, and then there's the active fill and stroke in the color panel. And to apply it, we just need to click that sampled color, and that will add it as a fill. You can add it as a stroke if you want. You just need to activate the stroke and then click that sampled color the same way. I'm going to leave the stroke black though, so we can see what we're looking at. So I'm just going to do Command Z to undo that. Now that we have a color applied to the bear shape, we're going to need to set up color for the shadow, which I'm going to draw with the pencil tool. So let's deselect the bear. We're going to go to our pencil tool, and we want to make sure that the width is active. Currently I have sculpt turned on, so I'm going to turn that off to start with. We'll use that in a second, but we don't want that turned on just yet because it is going to affect any shape that we have selected. The controller I'm going to set to pressure, and I'm also going to activate stabilizer. And using the first option, which is a rope stabilizer, I'm going to set the length to 30 something. Right now it's 32.2. That should be fine. I also have the options for autofill, auto close, and keep selected turned on. So you'll want to use those when we go to sculpt the shadow to make sure that we don't do something weird with our shapes. And finally, I'm also going to activate the insert inside button. What that means is that when I draw the shape, I'm going to have the bear shape selected, and it's actually going to add that as the shadow and clip it to the shape of the bear. Finally, we need to go ahead and select the color for this. I'm going to activate the fill again. We'll use that eyedropper, and I'm just going to select some kind of like a dark blue from one of these images. I think that dark blue works for now. We'll go ahead and click that to apply it. It is important to make sure that you don't have any shapes selected, otherwise it is going to apply it. So if you accidentally applied that color to the bear shape, you just need to deselect the bear and apply the color without having that active. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the bear, go back to the pencil tool, and you can see when I drag that across, it's going to use the sampled color and fill that we just selected rather than the bear's fill. Even though, while we have the bear selected, we can see that that fill is active. As soon as we start drawing, it's going to use that sampled color. So you grab the pen and going to add some shadows to the back of the bear and the bottom here. It's going to be pretty smooth and abstract, so just going to kind of swoop that down there. And since I have auto close active, it'll go ahead and close that shape for me. You can see if I drag this shape off in the layer stack, we'll just drag it off the bear. The entire shape is quite big, but because we have it drawn while we had insert inside active, it's going to clip it to that bear. You can really clip anything to any shape in the layer stack. All you have to do is drag the shape onto whatever shape you want to clip to. So if we drag it onto the bear here and drop it, you can see that they basically become grouped. And if I do anything with the bear, like move it around, it'll bring that curve with it, since the curve is now a child of the bear. There are a couple of different ways to clip things. One of them is, like we've just seen, clipping. The other is masking. If you drag something onto the icon of a layer, it's going to create a mask. And that's kind of like the opposite operation of clipping. So now we've got the bear is now only revealed by that mask. I want to undo that and make sure that it's just clipping to the bear. Let's activate sculpt mode for just a second and tweak this shape a little bit. With sculpt mode active, you'll see this little line going across your curve. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's this little blue line going across the curve. And what you want to do is just draw across until it meets up with that curve again, and it will automatically tweak the shape to match that curve. You can add to your shapes or you can subtract from them using this. It does take a little bit of practice though, because if you drag it out to like here, for instance, it's just going to add a whole bunch. We don't want that. So you want to make sure that you start and end on part of your curve. We'll add the shadow on the belly there. We'll add a little bit the shadow on the neck. This is a really, really nice way to add some curvature without having to get in there and manually move all those little nodes around. While we're working with the pencil tool, we'll also add a nose and an eye for the bear. So again, making sure that insert is active. I'm going to go to the pencil tool. I'm going to turn sculpt off, and I'm going to change the stabilizer from rope mode to window mode. And window mode is based on the speed of the cursor rather than being kind of a fixed distance from the cursor like rope is. So that it gives us a little bit more control over the shapes that we get. I'm also going to use the eyedropper tool to select different colors. So let's deselect the bear, use the eyedropper, and then just the nose of the bear from that reference image. I'm going to reselect the bear shape again, go back to pencil tool or hit N on the keyboard, and we can just draw our shape there. It's closed the shape for us. It has not applied that black that we sampled, but we can just go ahead and tap that to apply it. And now all the other shapes that we draw will have that same color. We'll go ahead and draw the eye as kind of a teardrop shape and hit Command 0 to zoom out again. We'll go back to the Move tool and deselect.
Struggling for a spark? Fire up the largest unlimited creative subscription in the world. Find and download authentic graphics, templates, photos, and fonts. Get seriously creative. And go supernova with Envato Elements.
Next, let's have a look at the vector paintbrush. The vector paintbrush combines raster and vector elements. It can paint raster strokes and texture along a vector line. Exporting these may not be supported depending on the format you choose, so you might want to experiment before doing a whole project with it. But we'll go ahead and activate the paintbrush on our toolbar, and we're going to add a little bit of highlights to the bear. We'll activate the paintbrush here. Let's go ahead and select the bear shape. I'm going to change the stabilizer to window mode and change that 25 up to about 35. For the color, I'm going to go ahead and just select the color that we currently have for the bear. We can always change this later, but I'm going to be using blend modes to add a bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to start the same color that I have for the body of the bear. So for color, we'll go ahead and open that up, use our color picker here and just drag it onto the bear, and then click that to activate the color. We also need to set our blend mode and controller. I'm going to set the blend mode to screen since I'm doing highlights. We'll set the controller to brush default if it isn't already. If it's set to none, just change that to brush default. So most brushes will default to using pressure for the size. We'll go into the brushes panel, which is right next to layers here. And I'm going to use one of these watercolor brushes. I think 128 should look good, but we can always change that later if we need to. When I selected the brush, you'll notice that it also changed the blend mode back to normal. So let's go ahead and set that to screen again. And I'll go back to layers, make sure the bear is still selected, and activate the insert inside selection. We just paint over the bear here. And it's not doing much, but we can add multiple strokes over top. And each stroke will just kind of add a bit more of that screen blend mode. We want it underneath the eye and nose shape. So I'm going to go into the layer stack here. I'll select one of these strokes. We'll go into the select menu, go to select same, and do select same blend mode. That'll get all of the strokes that we just made. And while we're doing this, I'm going to right click and just add a tag, since we're going to have a whole bunch of these and I don't want to have to keep selecting big groups of them. I want to be able to select them all at once. So I'll be able to select my tag a little bit later. Now I'm going to go ahead and do Command G to group them, or Control G on Windows. We'll drag that underneath our shadow and the nose and eye shape there. That way it's not affecting those. And if I want, now I can go ahead and open this group up. Select one of these. We'll go back again to select same, and this time to select same fill color. And we can change the color. We use the same color as the bear, but if I want to make this a little bit more blue, we can go ahead and do that. We've added quite a bit of detail to the polar bear, so we'll go ahead and add some color to the rest of the scene so that we can start to fill in our shadows and highlights from that. I'm going to be using parametric rectangles to add the water to the scene and our sky and things like that. But before we get into using those parametric shapes, we want to discuss the power of parametric shapes within Affinity Designer, because it's really one of the most powerful tools in the app. In our toolbar, you can see we've got this rectangle tool, an ellipse, and then you may have a rounded rectangle here instead of a polygon. But if you click and hold on this, anything with the little arrow in the bottom right of the icon, you're going to see that you have a whole bunch of different options here. So I am going to go ahead and create a polygon for now, just so that we can see some of the different controls that we have on a parametric shape. So I'll release on polygon, and then click and drag to create the shape. Just like the images that we worked with before in the Move tool, holding the Command or Control key on Windows will let you scale from center. Holding Shift keeps it proportional. Holding Spacebar allows you to reposition. And I'm just going to create this polygon right here. And I'll zoom in on it a little bit using the Option key or Alt on Windows and my mouse wheel. And we've got this one little slider right here in orange. If I drag that, it's going to create curves on each of these lines. We'll go ahead and give it a little bit of curvature. And then let's look at the context bar up here at the top. We've got our fill and stroke, just like other tools that we're familiar with. We also have some presets here, so we can change this to a hexagon or heptagon, octagon. And let's go ahead and set it to hexagon here. And you can see that it's changed the number of sides from 5 to 6. We can increase or decrease the number of sides here. And then we can also add curvature. So that's like dragging that little orange handle around. I'm going to leave the curvature at 0 so that we can see what the smooth points does. And then let's go ahead and drag this again. You can see that the smooth points is just going to give a little bit of curvature to those corners. So instead of having sharp corners, we're going to have just a bit of curvature there. Let's go ahead and turn that curvature off, setting it back down to 0. Different parametric tools have different controls. So our polygon has a number of sides, has curvature and smooth points. We go back into this drop-down list and try the crescent tool instead, for instance. We can drag this out, again, holding Shift to keep it perfectly proportional, holding Command to scale from the center. Let's just hold spacebar and reposition it down here. And now we've got two different orange handles here. One controls the curvature of this side, and this one controls the curvature of the outside. So if we wanted to create like a crescent moon, we can really quickly do that by just dragging these around. Now I do have snap turned on, so it's snapping for me here. We can check out our context bar at the top. We've got very different controls here. So we've got left and right curve, then we've got mirror and negate options. We've already messed with our left and right curve, so we'll leave that as is. Let's go ahead and click mirror. You can see that that just flips the shape to the other side. We can click negate, and that basically fills in the opposite part of that curve. So we had our crescent on the outside of this. Assuming that this would be a circle, we're basically just going to get the opposite part. I'm going to clear these off of the screen because we're not going to be using those. So I'm just going to go back to the Move tool, hold Shift and select both of those, delete them, hit Command 0 to zoom back out. And here I'm going to be using the rectangle tool and just drag out a shape that's going to be the water. It's going to scale this up just a little bit so it goes completely outside of the bounds of our document. You can see that we have controls here too. We've got single radius, we've got absolute sizes, we've got quarter settings. this is one of the most powerful parts of this. If you look at the rectangle and the rounded rectangle, there's essentially no difference. It's just a different preset. So if we look at the presets we've actually got a rounded rectangle in those presets. We also have a partially rounded rectangle. So whenever you create a rounded rectangle, you're just creating a rectangle with some presets here. And notice when we did that partially rounded rectangle, we now get a whole bunch of different controls for the corners. Let's go back to just a rounded rectangle and see how to get all of those separate controls. And that's just by unchecking this single radius option right here. The single radius makes it so that all of the corners have the same radius. And you can also control that with this little orange handle right here. But if we turn off single radius, we now have a different little orange handle on each corner. And if I want to make one corner really, really curved, I can do that. And if I want to make one corner curved and then change the curve profile for a different corner, so say top left, instead of having a rounded corner, we want to have a straight bevel, we can do that too. So we can have really complex shapes here, but it's all parametric. If I go take this shape and I move it around or rescale it, all of that stays proportional to the shape. All of these are percentages, and so it's just based on the scale of the shape that we have created. If I want to turn this into something editable, where I have access to the actual nodes, you'll notice if I go to the node tool, there's really nothing I can do with this. It's still the same as the move tool. We don't have any node controls. I'll just need to convert this to curves, and that will basically bake all of these parametric options into a path. And now we can drag these around, and we have control over all of these, so we can add curvature, Bezier handles, just like that. And it's now editable. The advantage of doing parametric shapes is that it speeds things up a lot because we don't have to wrangle all of these separate little nodes and move them around and have all these little Bezier handles. We can just adjust a couple of settings, and no matter what size or shape or position we set that shape to, it's going to keep all of that information. It's going to keep it proportional to the shape. I'm going to go ahead and delete this rectangle. Let's go ahead and add the rectangle back in for the water in our background. Instead of black, let's give this more of a blue color. I'm going to use the color picker, my color panel over here, to sample some of the watercolor from one of these images. I think that kind of green-blue should be good. We can always change this later, but we'll go ahead and apply it and see what it looks like. So click that color to apply it. And as I go through this and start adding colors to my scene, I'm going to want to be able to reuse these colors. So it's a good time to talk about swatches in Affinity Designer. I'm going to drag the swatches panel out and put it down here so we can see colors and swatches at the same time. When we first open it, the swatches panel has this selection of default colors, and we can click this dropdown. We have a whole bunch of different color libraries. We have Pantone colors here. We also have system web-safe colors. But for this, I'm going to want to create my own color palette. And we have our recent colors, but as we work through the document, these are going to get removed. So I want to have something that persists that I can go back and reference and save colors to. So let's create a library for this document. We have our little hamburger menu in the top right of the swatches panel, and we have different palettes that we can create. We can create an application palette, document palette, or a system palette. There are some slight differences between each of these. An application palette is going to be available to all of the different documents that we have open at a given time. A system palette is going to be more like a preset that we can load up whenever we want, and then all the documents will have access to that palette. We're going to be using a document palette, though, because document palette gives us access to a really powerful tool called global colors. And global colors essentially make it so that we can change the color of everything that has a swatch applied by changing the swatch itself. So we don't need to go reapply that swatch to all of our different things that have it set as a color, we can just change the color on the swatch and everything will get synced. So let's go ahead and create a document palette since it's the only one that supports global colors. We'll go ahead and name this iceberg. And by default, there's nothing in here, but we see we've got these two buttons here. One is add current fill to palette, and one is add current color to palette as a global color. And that's what we're going to be using for our colors. So let's go ahead and select this rectangle that we just created. And the current color is just whatever is active. We've got the stroke and then we've got the fill. We want to make sure that that fill is active because that's what's going to be added as a global color. You'll notice when I switch between these in the color panel, it does also switch between fill and stroke in the swatches panel. And we also have this sampled color picker as well. So with this active and our fill set to the forefront and active, we're going to go ahead and click this add current color as a global color. Let's go ahead and add it as a regular swatch as well so we can see the difference between them. They're very small, but we can see these little swatches here. So a regular color swatch is just going to be a little square, but a global color swatch is going to have this little white triangle in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to undo to get rid of that other swatch because I want to just use global colors here. There are also lots of very quick ways to get a selection of colors as well. So if we select an image or when we just bring in all of our images, we can actually sample colors from those by adding a color palette from image or color palette from document. The reason I haven't done this is that I just want to have a very limited selection of colors. When we create a color palette from document or from image, we get all of the colors in there and it can be a little bit unwieldy to work with. So I'm just going to create my own color palette, but this can be a very quick way to just get a selection of colors, especially if you take like a sunset photo or something like that, where you like all the colors and you just want to have that ready to go. You can create that palette from image. So now that we've got this color, we also need to apply it. See, creating the swatch is fine, but it hasn't actually applied the swatch to this. So if I change the global color swatch, is not going to change the object that we currently have selected. So let's go ahead and just click that swatch to apply it. Now that it's applied, you can see it's got a little outline around it, and that means that it is now currently active. We can select something else like the bear, and we can see that that swatch is no longer active. But now if I select that rectangle again, we can see that it is active. And if I deselect the rectangle and just double click on that swatch, we get RGB sliders, hex sliders, and we also have an HSL color wheel. I'm going to go ahead and go to the RGB sliders and just tweak this color a little bit. And even though I don't have that rectangle selected, because it's a global color, this rectangle is actually going to change color too. So we can go ahead and just make this a little bit more bluish and a little bit more cartoony, so it's not quite so natural, I guess. Right, that's good. So we'll go ahead and leave that for now. Since it's a global color, we can always go back and change it. Now let's go ahead and create the surface of the water. We've got this rectangle already created. Let's go ahead and get rid of the stroke. And then I'm just going to duplicate this rectangle by hitting Command J. So Command J is going to create a copy, and we can go ahead and activate its fill. Again, let's sample a lighter blue, something like that from that image. We'll activate it, and let's make this a little bit smaller. Now, I don't want this rectangle to extend up here beyond the rectangle underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and clip it to that rectangle underneath. That way we can make it as big as we want, but once we clip it by dragging here in the layer stack, now it doesn't matter how big it is, it's not going to extend beyond the bounds of the rectangle behind it. Now, no matter how big it is, it's not going to extend beyond the bounds of the rectangle it's clipped to. So this is a pretty good lighter color, I think. So we can go ahead and add this as a global color as well. Let's expand a rectangle, select it, And again, making sure that the fill is active here, it will create a global color. And then, as always, make sure to apply the global color so that it is linked to that shape. Now that we have the water created, let's go ahead and add some detail to the iceberg so we can start filling in colors there. I'm going to hold the Option key or Alt on Windows and zoom in on the top of the iceberg. I also want to make sure that the top iceberg line, both the original and the duplicate, are there above the water where we can see them. I'll go ahead and move the bottom part of the iceberg underneath those in the layer stack. I'm going to be using the pen tool to join these. So let's go ahead and activate pen tool. And I'm going to switch this to line mode. That'll just make it a little bit faster to draw individual lines. We're going to be joining this all together with the paint bucket tool or the vector flood fill tool over here. And all we need for that to work is just lines. They don't have to be connected, they just have to touch. So as long as they're touching, that's fine. In order to facilitate that, I'm also going to be using some snap settings. So I already have my snap settings set to the curve drawing preset. That means that snap to object geometry is active and everything else is turned off except for snap to visible objects. But I have some additional snap settings on the pen tool here. So we're going to leave the first one off, the align nodes to selected curves, but we're going to make sure to turn on these others like snap to geometry of selected curves, snap all selected nodes when dragging, and the align handle positions when using snapping options. So now that we have all of that set up, we're in line mode, we've got our snap settings turned on. I'm just going to go down here and you can see by the yellow highlight that it is snapping to that corner point. And we're just going to create some lines. Since I'm in line mode, it's not going to create multiple shapes. It's just going to leave open lines. And they're disappearing as I draw them. That's just because they don't have the stroke applied. But we can see that it has created them here in the layer stack. So I'm going to hold Shift and select all those curves. We'll just apply a black stroke to those. All right, now that we've got these divided up, I'm going to go ahead and break that curve for the lower part of the iceberg, the bottom part of the iceberg. I know we closed that curve earlier as part of the demo, but we're going to go ahead and break it open now. So let's switch to the node tool and just select that curve to make it active. I'm going to click once along that top line that's inside the top of the iceberg there. Just like we have a button for close curve, we also have a button for break curve. So I'm going to go ahead and click that with that node selected. Whatever node is selected when we click break curve will get turned into two nodes, and I'll just delete those. Now that we've got all of that stuff put together, let's go ahead and group all of these lines and we can start filling them in. So I'm going to select the top iceberg line in my layer stack here, plus all those curves and bottom iceberg, and then just hit Command G to group them. As long as we have this group active, the vector flood fill tool will recognize this as an outline that we want to fill. When we use the vector flood fill tool, it's not going to fill these shapes, but actually going to create new shapes based on these lines. So we have a fill active here. I'm going to change that to a lighter blue. So let's go ahead and double click that. In the color chooser here, we're just going to make that kind of a nice light blue to start off with. And I'll edit the colors once I've got the shapes created. It's a little bit faster to do it that way. But all we need to do is drag across shapes that we want to join. So I want this corner and this rectangle here. I want this corner and this shape here to be joined into a single rectangle. So I'm just going to drag across those. And you can see in the layer stack, it's now created this rectangle right here. Go ahead and select the group again so it's active. We can go ahead and just click here to create shapes for these, but then we also want to click and drag across those to make a single rectangle for those. So now we've got 4 rectangles. Now that we have our shapes in place, we just need to apply the colors to them. I've got highlights on the right and shadows on the left, so we'll continue that general theme. This rectangle on the far right already has a pretty light blue, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next one, which is this rectangle right here, and we'll use the color picker on this iceberg reference that I've got and just select something fairly dark. make that blue right there. Move on to the next rectangle and just continue on like this. This will be a little bit lighter. We'll click apply, and then we'll finish with this one, which will be fairly dark. Okay, now that we have the colors applied, let's just create global colors for each of these shapes. Just select the shape and then click Create Global Color here in the Swatches panel. And add global color, and then we'll add a global color, and finally add global color. And then, of course, we need to make sure to apply those global colors. We'll start with the top of the iceberg here, and I want to fill that in with a light color. I'm just going to select it, and then we'll click that light blue that we created. But I do want to have a little bit of definition between this one and the one below it. If I move to the color panel, we only have this one slider for the intensity, and I'm just going to bring that down a little bit so it's much lighter. When we do that though, and I switch back to swatches, you can see it still has that color applied, but it's like we've added a change to that on top. I'm just going to click this to create a new global color, and then click that new one to make sure it's applied to the top. Let's deselect everything, and I'm going to double click on that global color that we applied to this rectangle on the right. We'll switch that to HSL slider, so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. Tweak it and make sure that it is applied to this rectangle as well. Let's do the same with this one. We'll just tweak the color a little bit, double click, and I'm going to darken this one and make it a little bit more blue instead of green. And then this one here, we'll go ahead and select it. We can see which color is applied to it. Double click that, and we'll just make that a little bit brighter as well. So we've got a little bit more variation in the colors. It's a little bit more cartoony, but since it's global colors, we can always go back and tweak these as we reuse them. Now that we have the colors applied, we can start to use those same colors throughout the rest of the iceberg. And since they're global swatches, we can change them as needed and everything else will update. I'm going to start to tweak this bottom part of the iceberg here, and you can follow along with that, or you can kind of do your own thing. It's really up to you. But I'm going to first switch to the node tool and just tweak these points a little bit. When we're happy with the shape of the iceberg, we can go ahead and draw some lines, just like we did on this top part here, to connect everything up, and then we'll use that vector flood fill tool to join everything together. So I'm going to go back to the pen tool. It's still on line mode, which is perfect. And I'm just going to look at some of these shapes here and kind of figure out where I want my highlights to be and where I want my shadows to be. And you can break this up in a number of ways. You can just click on these points and kind of create some faces to start with. Like I know that this is all going to be facing left. So I'm going to go ahead and do that there. I know that this here kind of needs to be broken up, so I need to figure out something to do there. And a handy trick for that, at least with these facets, is to triangulate the shape to find the center of it. So I'm just going to go down to there. And then we know roughly where the center is. So if I triangulate like that, we can bring up a line there and snap to that. And then we got these three faces just like that. And then this can be like a little shadow area. Now that we have the lines kind of showing where we want our shadows and highlights, we can group these lines together and then use that vector flood fill tool to join everything together. So let's go ahead and take all of the curves that we just drew and add them to the group. While we're at it, let's also take this top iceberg that we filled, and we're going to separate that out and add it to our other filled shapes. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and that way we have one that's going to be aligned. So I'll take the fill off of this one and click that little cross line through to say set fill none, and select the other one that still has the fill, switch to the stroke, and then get rid of that stroke. We'll make fill active again, and then I'm just going to drag this out, and we'll put that with the other filled shapes. Now that we have a group with all of the outlines, we can activate that and use that for the vector flood tool. So let's click on the little paint bucket. I'm going to activate that lighter color that I used for the highlights here, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight this entire face, just like that. We're going to use that really, really dark color that we had for the left side for that little triangle right there. We'll use this kind of medium dark green color for this one. We'll use this kind of slightly lighter blue-green color for this one here, and also for this one. So if you accidentally forget to drag over them, it's better to go ahead and undo and then just drag across, and that way it'll create one shape for you. As we're drawing this, it reminds me that I do want to have kind of an edge, like a highlight just along this left edge. So I'm going to go back to the pen tool and just draw a line from top to bottom there. That way we'll have that highlight to fill in. All right, let's add that curve to the group. Make sure the group is active. Go back to the vector flood fill tool here, and we're going to make all of this stuff quite dark. So I'm going to select that dark blue and just paint over all of those. And then I'm going to use that lighter blue and just drag across those guys right there. And then for this part right here, I'm going to go ahead and use that really, really dark color as well. Now that we've done that, we've got a little bit more form and kind of three-dimensionality in this iceberg, but I also still need to kind of set this up so that it's sticking out of the water. We don't want to have the iceberg on top of the water. We want to have the top of it kind of sticking out. So to do that, we're going to have to separate out the top and the bottom. Now, I've got all these different shapes, and we'll need to group them by the ones that are on top and the ones that are on the bottom. So that should be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to go back to the Move tool, and we'll go ahead and select all of these pieces that are part of the top iceberg, plus that filled part of the top iceberg, and then hit Command G to group those. And we'll just call this top filled. We'll do the same thing for all the pieces in the bottom part of the iceberg. We'll select all those, just click one, hold Shift, and select the bottom one, and then hit Command G to group those. We'll name this the bottom filled. Now, I just want to bring these into the rectangles that make up the water. We'll bring the bottom filled underneath the rectangle. That's kind of the top surface of the water, and we'll take this top filled and we'll bring it on top of that rectangle. So now we've got them separated. And if we want to go and select these later and move them as one thing, it's going to be kind of clumsy to have to grab one and then hold Command and select the other one. So a quick way to do this, if you have a lot of shapes, in this case it doesn't really matter because it's just the two, but if you do have a lot of shapes, it helps a lot to go ahead and name them something similar. So instead of bottom filled and top filled with separate names, let's go ahead and just call them iceberg. We can change the name by just double clicking on the name or by right clicking and then going to rename, but I'm going to double click on that and we'll call this iceberg. And before I click out of it, I'm going to do Command A and Command C to copy that name. Now we'll just double click there and then do Command V. Now, if I select one of these and go to the Select menu, select Same Name, it's going to select both of those. So we can't have them grouped because we need to have this shape in between them, but we can have them the same name and then still treat them like a group. Now, we also want to separate out the lines as well, because I do want to keep the lines in here. We're going to use them as decoration, but I don't want to have them kind of floating over the water like this. So let's go ahead and expand out the group of lines here. We have the top iceberg already, and then we've got all of the vertical lines that we created earlier. So I'm just going to hold Command and select those. We're going to hit Command X to cut those. We'll open up that rectangle, the water, and I'm just going to do Command V to paste them on top of this filled iceberg. And I'll hit Command G to group them. Now I can take all these other lines in this group, and I'm just going to drag them down under that rectangle. So now we've got the lines that go around there, and we've got these lines down here. We also want to clean this up a little bit. I don't want to have all of these little triangulation lines through here. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on these and just delete some of these lines. You can get into a group of lines by just double clicking in the interface here, and that'll open up the group for you. And this one here, I'm just going to drag that down like that. Okay, perfect. To get rid of these little corners, I just need to break this curve. So we have the two top iceberg copies, and all I need to do is select this one that's a little bit lower. And just like we did before, we're going to break that curve. So I'm going to go to the node tool. We'll click once on that line. With that node selected, we'll go up to our options and hit break curve. And then I will delete those two nodes. Do the same thing over here. We'll select that, hit break curve, and then delete that node and delete that. We also have these little nodes up here that we can get rid of. Clean that up. So now we have the outlines. We can use these as decoration. So let's go ahead and give these outlines a color. Then we can look at the brush tool again, just like we used for the highlight on the bear, to add a little bit of texture to this iceberg. So let's go ahead and name this group the top outlines, and we'll name the bottom group here the bottom outlines. When we're working with groups, it's important to note that the colors of the group will override the colors of the individual shapes. I have the group selected, and you can see there's no fill and no stroke applied to this group. If I open this up, though, each one of these lines has the black stroke applied. I don't need to change every single line. I just need to change the color of the group. I'll select the top outlines, hold Command, and select the bottom outlines, and then I'll just apply this global color number 4. That'll make all those outlines brighter instead of having just black lines. Nope, we also need to delete that line right there. Don't want to have that guy in there. Okay. Now that we have the color applied, I'm going to hit Command 0 to zoom out. Let's go ahead and hide our references since we don't really need those now. Now that we have the color applied, let's go ahead and add a brush to these to give them kind of a little bit of texture and just make them feel more natural. So I'll select top outlines, hold Command or Control on Windows, and get the bottom outlines here. I'm going to go to brushes, and we have all these different groups of brushes to use, but I'm going to use inks and just use this jagged ink brush here. Now, this is a little bit large and a little bit heavy for these lines, so we can go into the stroke settings up here, or we can go into our stroke panel, which gives us a little bit more detail. The width is a little bit much, so I'm going to bring that down. We have a bunch of different settings here in stroke, so we can have solid line is going to undo the brush settings. We also have dash line that'll get rid of brush settings, and then we have the textured or brushed line, which is what we're currently using. We have width, which gives us control over how thick the line is. Caps aren't really going to apply since we're using a brush, but we can have rounded caps or butt caps or just flush caps here. The join is going to control corners. Wherever we have a corner node on a curve that continues through that corner, that's going to adjust how that corner is rendered. The default is to have a round join, and I'm just going to leave that. We also have an alignment. So for closed shapes, if we want to have the line on the outside, the inside, or just on the center of the path, we can adjust that here. The default is to have it centered. Then we also have this order setting, which is you can either have a stroke on top of or behind the fill. And the default is to have stroke on top of the fill. Since we don't have a fill on these, it doesn't really apply to us. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that turned off. The start and end settings are handy for infographics and things like that. We can add little decorations to these, but I'm going to go ahead and leave those off as well. We also have the properties, which is going to control how the brush responds to pen pressure. Since we didn't use a pen to create these, it's not really going to have a lot of bearing just yet, but we can actually change the pressure curve for all of these lines at once. So even though I didn't use the pen tablet to create them, we can still add some pressure to them. So to do that, we can just drag these lines down. You can see this is the start and the end, respectively, and then everything else is what happens in the middle. You can't move the start without also changing the end. Those are always going to have the same value. But if you want to have really pointy start and end, you can just drag those all the way down. I'm going to drag them fairly low, but not all the way down. And then I'll add some weight in the middle here, maybe a little bit thinner, and then a little bit thicker, just to add some variation. Now, if we adjust the width profile here, you can see that that's going to adjust the entire thing, but still factoring in the line weight that we set with our pressure. And we can still change to different brushes, and it's going to honor that pressure and line weight. Let's go ahead and go back to the brush that I had originally, though, that jagged ink, and just make it a little bit thinner. Now, let's add a little bit of opacity variation to these as well. We can open up our properties here, and the size variant is at max. So based on the pressure curve, that size is going to change. But then we also have opacity variance, and I'm just going to crank this opacity variance up quite a bit. So that means that it's going to not only get smaller, but it's also going to fade out. And we'll have some other settings here that you can play with, but I'm going to go ahead and leave those as is and just click close. Every time we make a change, it is a little bit frustrating that it changes our width back to the default, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and drag that back down again. And then we also have the ability to add gradients to our stroke. I'm going to leave that for now since we have the opacity variance. I don't want to make it too complex, but you do have the ability to go to the stroke up here and then change that to not only a regular fill, but also a gradient. Let's go back to the layers panel though, and with those two groups selected, let's change the blend mode. Blend modes are great for adding character and changing the way colors interact with each other, and just makes things all fit together a little bit better. I'm going to set these all to lighter color, and that will change the color of the stroke based on whatever color is underneath it. So everything fits together a lot better than if it's just normal blocky color on top of that fill color behind it. Now that we've got the colors applied to the iceberg, let's go ahead and add a little bit of texture with some gradients. This will help create that kind of subsurface scattering look that we've got in this reference, where the light is kind of going in and bouncing around inside the form. Just hit Command 0 to zoom back out. I'm going to go ahead and lock the lines layer, and you can lock layers and entire groups in the layer stack by just selecting them and then clicking the little unlock button up here on the top. Now we can no longer activate those lines at all, and we don't have to worry about clicking those. We'll do the same thing with the top outlines as well. We'll just click that little lock button. Just like we did before, I'm going to start the gradient along here at the top, and then I'll go ahead and fill in the gradient sped up through the bottom here. We'll start out with the lightest one over here on the right, and let's activate the gradient tool and have a look at our options up here. So you'll notice with the gradient tool, I've got swatches and my color panels open, but we don't have the stroke. We only have color. It doesn't tell us whether it's applying to the stroke or the fill, and that's because a gradient can apply to both. Right now, its context is set to fill, and that's the default. That's what we want. We also have a type, so we've got solid, and we've got elliptical, linear, radial, etc. So a solid color is what's already there. I'm going to change this to linear. And you can see as soon as I change it to linear, it's actually changed the fill for me. Then we've got this little slider here. So we can adjust the position of our colors. We can also adjust the interpolation and how it gets applied with this little slider. Let's have a look at a couple of the other options before we actually apply this. I'm going to be using linear, but let's take a look at elliptical. So the elliptical gradient brings in this extra handle, and by default, it's going to create a circular gradient, much like the radial gradient. The only difference between elliptical and radial is that elliptical gives us this extra handle, so we can make it really long and narrow, or we can squish it this way and make it really tall. I want to go ahead and make this one really long and thin. So to do that, we need to hold the Control key on Mac OS or Control on Windows, and then we can slide this down. You can see we're getting basically just a bar here, like a bar of lighter color. As I move this around, you can see how that's created this gradient. We can do the same thing with this one. We can drag this one in and just adjust the shape of that ellipse. If we look at radial, we've essentially just got one set of handles. We don't have the extra set. And it looks almost the same as a linear gradient, but it is creating a circular gradient instead. For all these, I'm just going to use linear because it's easier to control, and I'll drag that across the middle of the shape. You do need to be careful because at present there is a bug where if you drag a swatch out of the swatches panel and drop it onto the tool, it will crash Designer. So we don't want to do that. Instead, we can apply our colors in a couple of different ways. One way is to open up the controls here, and we can click on either one of these handles and then click the color, and then we can use our sliders here, or we can switch to swatches, but that's a little bit tedious. I don't want to mess with that. That seems like overkill. So instead, what we're going to do is just use this gradient tool to activate one of the knots on the gradient, make sure it's selected, and I'm going to be using the colors that I've already got applied here. So we're going to use the lighter color as the main color on this, and then for the darker color, I'll click this one, and I'm just going to use this color right next to it right there. Now, this is kind of backwards. So up here at the top, we've got rotate gradient, and we also have the reverse gradient. So I'm just going to click reverse, and that will adjust it so the darker color is on the other side. Then we can adjust the interpolation of this. That looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and apply a gradient to this next shape. Now, with the gradient tool active, I can go ahead and click on it. You do want to make sure that it gets highlighted, though, and that we've got the correct thing selected. And then we can just click and drag, and it's going to apply another gradient. Now, it's applied different colors, but we can go ahead and select this knot right here. It's going to be closer to this kind of medium light blue. And then I'll select this knot here, and we'll do our original kind of dark green color. And I'll just drag that over a little bit, and we can adjust the interpolation of that. So let's go ahead and do that again. We'll drag our gradient across. The color for this one, the main color, is going to be that same kind of light, medium light blue color. We'll activate that, but then right next to it is going to be this really dark blue. So I'll activate that. Just drag the slider over a little bit closer to it. All right, and then finally we'll do this shape here. Drag our gradient along that, and the main color is going to be this dark blue, but then I have this highlight down here, and we'll go ahead and use that. So the main color is already set to that dark blue. We'll click the other knot here, and we'll go use that really light blue again. And I'm just going to use a slider to kind of push that way over. So this has given me this nice kind of undulating color. I'm not super thrilled with this kind of dark green, so I'm going to go ahead and deselect everything. We'll double click on that and kind of push that more into the blue. And since this is a global color, it's going to affect not only our fills, our just flat fills, but is also going to affect the gradients where we have it applied to. So super handy. And let's go ahead and just make it a little bit brighter, I think. Something like that. We don't want it to be too bright. I think that's probably good. To add the noise to this, we're going to need to open up our gradient options up here. So I'm going to just double click on this until we get in here. We have that shape selected. We can see our fill here. Make sure that the gradient tool is active. We can see the color here. Now I can add noise to each of these colors individually. Unfortunately, when I do that though, it is going to unlink them from the global color. But we'll create separate swatches for the gradients once we've added some noise to them. To add the noise, we're just select one of the knots here, go into the color settings, and then just increase this noise parameter. I'm not going to drag it all the way up, just add a little bit. We'll do the same thing with this color here. We'll select it, increase the noise a little bit. I'll leave it a little bit less for the lighter colors. And when we're happy with that, we can go ahead and click this Add Current Fill to Palette. And so now we have this swatch that has that gradient already set up for us. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with this shape right here. So as soon as I select that one, we get this gradient active. I'm just going to go ahead and open up the noise settings here and increase that. Again, we'll leave it a little bit lighter. We'll make the noise a little stronger for the darker colors. And when we're happy with that, we'll just add it as another swatch. Same thing with this one. There are other ways to add noise. Unfortunately, it's a little bit buggy, and if you create the swatch first and then add noise, it turns it into a regular fill. Even though it's a little bit clunky to add noise this way, it unfortunately is kind of the only option as of right now. Okay, now that we have all these gradients set up and saved in our swatches palette here, we can go ahead and apply them to these other shapes that we've created. I'm going to go ahead and pan down, holding a space bar, double click, and then click again to make sure that this one is selected. Now, instead of going in and dragging the gradient tool around, I can just click these swatches and apply them. So I have this really light one to kind of medium dark, ready to go. Let's select this darker color. We'll go ahead and use that really dark to light. Medium here. We've got a medium to kind of light blue. We've got dark to light, this kind of medium green. And I'm just going to adjust the direction of this. And actually, this is a little bit too light. So we'll go ahead and adjust that to use this color instead. Unfortunately, we'll have to go ahead and go into our swatches and increase that noise a little bit. And I'll go ahead and save this as a new swatch so we have it here. Now that we have our gradients applied to the iceberg, let's go ahead and apply it to the water. We'll go ahead and collapse everything else. Select this rectangle, and I'm going to just create a new gradient for this one. We'll drag this down. We're going to use our darkest blue on the bottom part. And on the top part here, we will use this kind of medium light blue. We'll go ahead and add some noise to this one. And I'm going to do the same thing for the water on the top as well, but using a slightly lighter gradient. So let's select that shape. We'll go ahead and name this water surface while we're at it. We'll give it an elliptical gradient fill. For this one, we will use the lightest blue. For this one on the outside here, we'll use that kind of medium blue. Actually, we'll go with a slightly darker blue there. For this one here at the center, we'll actually use that really, really light, almost white blue. And then for these on the outside, we'll use this other really, really light blue. And remember, hold the Control key to adjust the size of this gradient. And we can go ahead into gradient settings and just give this a little bit of noise as well. Great. Now I'm going to add a little bit of color to the background, to the sky here. So I'm just going to select the artboard, and we'll go ahead and click that lightest blue. Can go ahead and make this a gradient as well. So I'll use my gradient tool, and just drag this up from the bottom. So we have the lightest blue at the bottom and the darker blue at the top. We've been kind of bringing the level of detail in the background up to match the polar bear, but now we've kind of gone beyond the level of detail that we had in the polar bear. So let's go ahead and tweak the polar bear a little bit and just make it kind of fit with the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and select the bear. We have the fill already on here, but I'm going to go ahead and make that a gradient as well. So let's go to our gradient tool, just go across. We'll select this darker color here, and I'm going to change that to a much lighter color. I'm just going to use my sliders though, and let's go ahead and lighten it up quite a bit. And you can see, even though we're making this lighter because we made the strokes for the highlights here, and looking at my reference, we can see the polar bear is a little bit warmer colored. Generally, it's got a little bit of yellow here, so we'll factor that into our colors and just make it ever so slightly warmer. We can also add a little bit of noise to this gradient as well so that it matches the rest. And let's go ahead and change this from linear to radial. Subtle gradients like that and a little bit of noise really go a long way to making everything feel more natural and kind of breaking up that smooth vector look. Let's go ahead and remove the outline from the polar bear. So I'm just going to select the polar bear shape, set the stroke to active, and then we'll set that to none. And finally, let's set the shadow of the bear here to be a little less strong. So I'm going to use one of these other colors that I've created. So let's bring in one of these blues here. Layers panel out, and we'll change the blend mode. Let's also adjust the opacity. It's a little bit strong, so we can just bring that opacity down slightly. Thinking instead of that green color, we'll use one of these gradients. Affinity Designer has adjustment layers, which we'll get into a little bit later, but it also has effects, which can be applied to layers individually. You can get to the effects in a couple of different places. We have the quick effects panel, but we also, on the layers panel, have this little effects button. So let's go ahead and select the shadow, then click the effects button here, and that's going to bring up this little floating menu. We have a whole bunch of different options here, and you can get into all of these and kind of play around and mess with them. For now, I just want to show you what it is and kind of give you a rundown of how to apply these effects. One that I use a lot is Gaussian blur. So we'll go ahead and select that. To make it active, we just need to check this box. And it's still not doing anything because we don't have any radius applied to our blur. We'll just increase the radius, and that's going to give us a really nice, soft shadow. Let's go ahead and close that, and I'll just bring the opacity down a little bit more. I'll hit the A key on the keyboard to bring up the node tool, and we'll just adjust the position of some of these nodes so that our shadow is a little bit softer. This is essentially creating a gradient, but it's just creating a gradient in a little bit more controllable way than using the linear sliders or the elliptical gradient tool. Underneath the bear, we'll go ahead and add a little shadow on the ice here. So let's just draw that in. I'm going to use the pen tool. And this time we're going to go ahead and use the smart mode to create a nice organic shape for that. And I'll just kind of click a couple of times here to make a nice rounded shadow. We'll go ahead and fill that with one of these darker blue colors that we have here. And I'm going to clip this to that ice shape. So we'll need to grab this curve, and we can just drag it down through the layer stack until we find the top of the iceberg, drag it onto that, and then clip it. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the shadow on the bear and add some effects to that. So we'll click Effects. Again, using the same Gaussian blur, we'll just increase the distance on that. And then we'll also change the blend mode to something like darker color, so it's not quite so strong. Let's also use one of these other colors or one of the gradient swatches that we've got here. And we'll take the opacity down as well. Hit Command 0 to zoom back out. Finally, we just want to create a bit of a specular highlight here. And I want to use that to show you how to work with compound shapes and the really powerful tool, the contour tool. We'll duplicate the top of the iceberg and use that for the specular highlights. So I'm going to go into the iceberg group, select the top of the iceberg. We'll just hit Command J to duplicate it. We'll drag that outside of the iceberg and just collapse iceberg for now. I'm also going to go ahead and lock the iceberg so we don't accidentally select that. I'm also going to lock the water surface as well. We don't want to accidentally select that either. Now let's change the name of this from top iceberg to specular so we know what we're working with. I'm going to expand that out and get rid of the curve that we've got attached to it for the shadow. Don't worry, it's still there in our other iceberg section. We just don't see it here. So let's drag this underneath the iceberg so we see it there. I'm also going to go to the Move tool and let's go ahead and hide all of our references. We don't need all that stuff. We'll zoom in a little bit and holding Option and the mouse wheel, and then I'm just going to drag this down a little bit. Now I'm going to hide the bear and the iceberg for just a second so we can see this a little better. So we'll hide the bear and we'll also hide top of the iceberg so we can see this shape that we've actually got. I'm going to switch to the node tool and I'm just going to do Command A to select all the nodes, and we're going to convert these to smart nodes. That'll give us a nice organic shape here. Now that we've got this, I want to duplicate it again, and we're going to create a compound shape with this. Unfortunately, the order that you create these things, compound shapes and warp groups and things, does matter because you can't take a warp group and then put it into a compound shape without expanding it. So we'll take our shape here. I'm just going to hit Command J to duplicate it. And I'm going to make the one underneath a little bit larger. So select that one. We'll go to our Move tool. I'm going to hold Command and Shift and just scale it up a little tiny bit. Doesn't need to be much. I just want to be able to see it. In the layer stack, I'm going to select both of these. So select one, hold Shift or Command and select the other one. Now I'll go to Layer and we're going to create Compound. Let's expand this compound shape that we've created. We can see we've got our 2 copies of specular. And just to the left of this curve, you can see that we've got a little tiny plus sign that matches our plus sign up here. So this is a Boolean operation that it's doing, but this is not a destructive Boolean operation. This is still live. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and switch this to a subtract operation. Instead, I've got specular selected. You'll notice too, we don't have any options for the bottom shape. We only have options for the shapes that stack on top. We'll have options for all of the shapes that stack on top if we add multiple shapes to this compound, but we only have these options for everything that's above the base. We'll change this to subtract, and you can see now it's knocking a hole out of the shape underneath it. This is still a live shape though, so I can do all sorts of things with this. If I go in here and select that specular shape and scale it or move it around, it's still live. This is a really fun tool to play with because we can also combine it with a contour tool to do some really fun organic things and create kind of liquidy effects. So let's use that contour tool to expand the outside shape. We'll select the bottom shape that's on the outside, we'll grab our contour tool and just add something to that. So we will also take this base layer and just transform it a little bit. I'm going to go to my move tool and hold command and kind of squish it down vertically and expand it horizontally. We can also hold the control key and kind of rotate it around a little bit just to add some variation to this. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and select the compound, go back to our contour tool, and we're going to reduce the contour. And you can see how we get this like very liquidy kind of a shape here. Now that we've created the compound, I'm going to just duplicate it. We'll hit Command J on the keyboard and select both of those compound shapes by holding Shift. Go to Layer and then create another compound. So we've got booleans nested within booleans. So let's expand this out. We'll select the duplicate that we just created. We'll select the subtractor inside of that compound shape. I'm going to go to the Move tool, and we'll just change the shape of this a little bit. Instead of having it cutting vertically, I'm just going to bring it in vertically, so it's a little bit narrower, and then we'll expand it out horizontally, so it's cutting that direction. Now, let's go ahead and collapse that compound. I'm just going to go into the contour and reduce the width on that. We'll select our other compound, and we'll also reduce the width on that one. And then we can select the entire compound and increase or decrease as needed. I'm going to go ahead and select this compound here and just scale it up slightly so that we've got kind of a couple of layers of ripples here. Now we'll bring back the iceberg, and we will bring back the bear and all the other stuff that we hid earlier. And now I can take this compound and we'll just transform it until it works. And it's not kind of overlapping our iceberg in any weird way. I'm also going to adjust the blend mode on this. So we'll change the blend mode for the entire thing to lighter color. And we'll select a slightly different color for the fill. And that's it for our highlights on the surface of the water. We hit Command 0 to zoom out, and now we can go ahead and export this. I do want to make a couple of final adjustments to this before we export it and just scale the bear, the iceberg, and our highlights down a little bit. So I'll expand the rectangle here a little bit, collapse all of these extra bits, and I'm going to select the iceberg, the bottom outlines, our compound shape, the iceberg, top outlines, and the bear. And we'll right click this and we'll give it a tag. I'll use the blue tag. Let's also unlock everything. Now I'll select the bear, go back to select same tag color. And now we can go ahead and scale this down. Get them holding Shift. You can see, since we're selecting by tag color, it's really easy to manage all of these shapes. All right, that looks good. I think we are ready to go ahead and export this. The export persona does not have nearly as much going on as the main Affinity Designer persona, but it is kind of a nice workspace for getting all of your work out the door and making sure that it's all exported to all the different formats that you need. There are a few different ways to work with the export persona. One is to work with artboards that you bring in from the designer persona, which is what we have here, and that's going to create slices. Now, you can also create slices within the export persona. So if you have a bunch of different pieces that you want to export, but it's all in one artboard, you can do that. But for me, I like to work with artboards as much as possible to keep my artwork separate. So we've got the artboard selected here. We have the entire document, and then we also have our artboard. If you have multiple artboards, you can activate all of them, but since I have just the one, I want to make sure that this little circle is checked, and you can click that check to export slices. It's going to treat this artboard as a slice. We can also expand this out and see all of our different presets. We can add multiple different export formats. We have some export options up here, but I'm going to be using the options within this preset. So we'll say we do want to go ahead and have a PNG. That's good for exporting things that have transparency. Of course, PNGs are great because they're also lossless. Let's go ahead and click the plus sign here. So we'll add an additional PNG. Now we can use this preset to maybe make one that's twice as large. So it's basically going to be twice the size of this original format of the 1080 by 1920. Let's go ahead and add yet another here. And this one, instead of a PNG, let's go ahead and change this to an SVG. And we have a few different options for SVG. So we can compress everything and try to make it a small size. We have SVG flatten, which is going to take all of our lines and our work and kind of flatten it out so that we don't have all the effects and everything. We also have SVG for export. So I'm going to go ahead and use SVG for export. Do plus sign one more, and we'll also just add a WebP. And we'll go ahead and do WebP lossless and default. We have our path here. So when we click this, this lets us define where we're going to save this to. And we've got some variables we can use to name the files when it exports everything. So we've got the document name, and we've got the document file, and we've got the slice name. So we're going to drag tokens up here, document name, document file, and the slice name. Done. And I'm going to go ahead and click export slices with that entire artboard one selected. When we export slices, it's going to ask me where I want to put this. I'm just going to go into my Affinity Designer course. We'll make a new folder. We'll call this exports. And then click export. Let me bring Finder over here. And it's put everything into a folder. Even though I created my own folder, it by default creates a folder for all your exports. So let's go ahead and close this. And we'll move on to project 2 and look at text. Affinity Designer has some pretty powerful text editing tools, so we're going to explore those in this next project. We're also going to have a look at some of the raster editing capabilities that we have available in the pixel persona as well. So let's go ahead and get our designer interface set up for this. I'm going to go up to Window and then just go to Studio and reset the studio. So I've got my default panels back. And then I'm also going to go back up to Window, Text, and open the character panel. Just dock that over here on the left. We'll also go to Window, Text, and bring up our paragraph panel. And there's a dock that over here below the character panel. Now let's create a new document. I'm going to go to File, New, and again, we'll create another social media story post. And this time I'm going to leave it in the wide landscape format and just click Create. When it comes to text in Affinity Designer, we've got two text tools. There's the text frame tool, which is kind of the default. And then we also have the artistic text tool, or art text. The art text tool is pretty straightforward, and that's what I primarily use when I'm working in Affinity Designer, since it's a little bit easier to manage the art text tool when it comes to scaling your text and moving things around. The text frame tool is great for paragraphs, but I typically do that kind of work in Affinity Publisher instead. So with the art text tool active, we're just going to click and drag, and whatever size we get when we drag, that's going to be our font size. We can see up here at the top, we've got 208.6, and we'll go ahead and type in our text. In this project, we're going to recreate an image I created for a blog a few weeks ago. So let's set the font for this. To set the font, all we need to do is change to the Move tool, and we can either adjust the font from here or from this context menu here at the top. But I'm going to just stick to the character panel since there's quite a bit more in the character panel. We have decoration controls, position and transform, we got typography things here. We also have spell check language and things like that. So if I wanted to change the spell check language to Spanish, for instance, we can do that here. But I'm also going to do the basic changes like font size and font and all that other stuff here on the character panel just to be consistent. So instead of Arial, let's change this to Futura. I'm just going to type that in, and then we'll actually use Futura PT. We'll change the weight to heavy, and we'll actually be using heavy oblique for this one. Now I'll put this roughly in the center. It's fine. Next, we'll use the text frame to see how that works. So click and hold on the artistic text tool, get that little drop down, and we'll change to frame text tool. And I'm just going to drag out a box over the entire document, and we'll type in the text that we're going to put in here. Now, this is considerably smaller, and when I dragged that box out, we didn't get the option to change our font size. It's just given us the default font size of 12 points. If we want to change the size of this, we'll have to select our text and then go to font size and make it bigger. It's a little bit clunky when we're doing something like this, where we're really just focused on a few words. But I said this is better for working with paragraphs and larger blocks of text. We're going to be using tungsten for this. And I'm just going to use the regular tungsten font for now. We've got all lowercase letters, but I want to change this to all uppercase. So we'll open up the typography options here. This is where we've got some of our things like ordinals and superscript and subscript. And then we also have our all caps option here. Now I can use this text frame tool to break all this text to different lines. When I scale the box down, rather than making the text smaller, it's just going to break it to more lines. Great for working with paragraphs, not so great for working with text that I want to be able to scale independently. But fortunately, we can always change back and forth between artistic text and a frame text at any time. All we need to do is select our text box, go up to the layer menu, and go down to convert to art text. You can see the box is now tight to the text here. And when I scale this up by dragging the corner, it will scale up the text. The keyboard shortcuts for this are the same as for vector shapes that we worked with earlier, and for images, holding Command will scale from the center, Shift will keep things proportional, or it will actually make it so you can squish things depending on which handle you have active. I'm just going to hold Command, and we'll put this roughly in the center. Let's hide Futura for a second. And we can see that this is all left aligned. So artistic text still has all the same controls that we would have in a text frame, and that includes center align. So if I click center align, it's going to center align all of the text in here. We can also go up to position and transform, and I'm just going to decrease the leading to bring these a little closer together. You can hold Shift while dragging here, and this will give you greater number changes. You can also release Shift and get a little bit more of a fine. You can also release Shift and get more fine-grained control over the position. Now, I want to adjust the size of these two lines independently so they kind of take up the entire width of this artboard. To do that, I'm just going to break this up into two separate artistic text boxes. So we'll just select rectangle, Command X to cut it. I'll delete that extra paragraph break and hit the Select tool again, and then do Command V to paste. When I paste this text, by default, it's going to paste it as a frame text instead of artistic text. So we'll need to go ahead and change that with the layer menu. Go back down to convert to art text again. And now, unfortunately, since I had part of that word cut off when I converted it to artistic text, it has now cut that off completely. So let's undo a couple stages. We'll expand that frame out. So you want to always make sure that you're not overrunning the text box before you convert it. Now I'll go back to layer, convert to art text again. Now let's align both of these to the center. So I'm going to select one and then I'll shift and select the other. We'll go to our align panel here. Let's just click center and then click apply. Now I'll scale these up to kind of fill up the space as much as possible, holding shift. You can see that we've cut off a lot of rectangle here. So let's just switch to a different version of tungsten. Instead of regular tungsten, we'll try tungsten condensed. And we can also change this from bold to black. I'm going to be clipping an image to this text, so I do want it to be pretty chunky. We'll go ahead and change this in a red from tungsten condensed to tungsten narrow. And then we'll change the rectangle word from tungsten condensed to tungsten compressed. Tungsten's a great font because it has lots of options for really creating nice, thick, chunky text. Let's bring this down so it's kind of bleeding off the bottom of the artboard here. And then we'll just scale it up so it's almost touching the top line. We'll scale the top line up until it's almost touching the rectangle line. And then we can either add a little bit of space between the letters, or we can just stretch them out to fill the space up as much as possible. I'm going to do the latter rather than adding space between the letters. So I'm just going to select them both. We're going to drag them all the way over to the end here and drag them all the way over to the right side there. Now let's go ahead and fit this top line right up tight to the edges so it's bleeding off. And we're good to go. So let's go ahead and bring in the image that we're going to be using. I'm going to click the Place tool, and we're going to be using this Barbara Kruger image from the blog that I mentioned earlier. Now I'm going to just drag this image out so it's taking up pretty much the entire width. This is leaving us very little DPI. We're all the way down to 63 DPI, but we're going to be adding some effects to this image, and it's kind of the look that we're going for, to have kind of a raw pixelated look anyway. So we want this to be pretty much centered because we're going to be covering it up. We'll drag this image down underneath all of our text. And let's just position it a little bit higher. There we go. I want to clip this image to the text, but unfortunately, because I've put the text into two separate boxes, it's not really going to work to do that. I would have to expand the text by converting it to curves or something like that, and then I would lose my ability to edit the text later on, which I don't want to do that. If I grouped the text by holding Shift and selecting both of them, then right-click and go to Group, dragging this image onto the group is just going to put it into the group. It's not actually going to clip it to one of the layers. If I drag it onto one of the text layers, it does what I want, but it only does it with one text line at a time. So neither of those options really works for what I want to do. Instead, I'm going to keep the text grouped, and I'm going to use it as a mask on the image instead. To add a mask, all we have to do is take the text, and instead of dropping it on the layer like we've been doing to clip, we're going to drop it on the layer's thumbnail. And this is kind of a crucial difference. Now, instead we're using the text as a mask. We can have multiple masks on one single image. Now that we've kind of got the look that we want for the image here being clipped to the text, let's go ahead and duplicate that image. Just select it, hit Command J. And on the duplicated image here, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that mask. So I'm going to expand that out and then just delete that. Let's bring this back behind the text layer. If I hide this duplicate image, we can see we still have the text above it. But let's go ahead and bring that back. And we're going to be using some blend mode trickery here to create this kind of effect where the image bleeds out of the mask. I'm going to select this image, go to blend mode, and we're going to be using the divide blend mode. Blend modes require some sort of color behind it in order to blend. So let's go ahead and turn this into an artboard. We'll go to the artboard tool, click insert artboard. And now that we have an artboard, we can go ahead and give that artboard a fill color. So let's go up here to the top on our color panel. We already have the fill active, and I just need to apply some kind of color. By dragging any of these sliders, it's going to go ahead and do that. By applying a white fill here, we can already see that that image has disappeared. Now, if I want to see more of that image, all I have to do is darken this background. You can see that image is starting to bleed in here and kind of ghost throughout the spaces between the letters. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and bring Futura back. And it's kind of hard to see that word, so let's create a rectangle to frame it. I'm going to select the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to drag it out. It really doesn't matter what size it is, because I'm going to show you a handy trick to make it exactly the size of our text in just a couple of clicks. Let's go ahead and select the rectangle, and I'm going to use my color picker to make it exactly the same red as the rectangle in the original image. Let's go ahead and get rid of the stroke. I'll go back to the fill here. And while we're at it, let's change the color of Futura to white. Still kind of hard to read. Let's go ahead and bring our rectangle up above everything else so it's blocking all of that stuff out. Now, we want the rectangle to be sized exactly to our text. It is important to know that whatever we select first is going to be the thing that everything else gets scaled to. If we select the text first, that means the rectangle is going to get scaled to the text size, not the other way around. So we'll select our text first, hold Shift, and then select the rectangle. We're going to go up to the Align panel here, and we can center this and center it vertically. Instead of centering to the artboard, I'm just going to center to selection bounds. And then down here at the bottom, we have this Make Same option. And we're going to make same width and make same height. And then just click Apply. Make Same is really, really handy because it just fits that rectangle to the bounding box of our Futura text. Now, we're going to need to give this a little bit of space, and we could scale the rectangle up, but that's going to look a little bit wonky if we do that. If I hit V to go to the Move tool and then just hold Shift and Command and scale this up, it gets pretty wide, but it doesn't get tall enough. So I'm just going to undo that, and instead I'm going to use the Contour tool to just give it a little bit of padding. We don't want round corners for this Contour tool, so instead I'm going to select sharp corners for it. Now we've got nice, consistent padding all the way around. Now that we've done that, let's give the rectangle a little bit of texture. So we still have it selected and active. I'm going to go up to the Fill, and we have Gradient here. So I'm going to select the red color, select the color settings here and then just add a bit of noise to that. For this, I'll just open up color here. We'll use the color picker and select some color from the rectangle itself. Apply that. It really doesn't matter if it's kind of the same. We just want to be able to add a little bit of texture here. Perfect. So we've got our noise applied and we're good to go and move on. Now I'd like to be able to see through this red rectangle, but unfortunately, if I use blend modes to do that, we're going to see that of in the original image behind it, which I don't really want. We're going to switch over to the pixel persona and start painting in some textured masks. In the pixel persona, we have a completely different toolbar over here on the left, and all of these tools are for working with raster. This doesn't have the kind of depth that something like Affinity Photo has, so you're not going to want to use this if you're trying to cut a person out of a background and maintain the hair perfectly. But it does have a pretty decent selection of tools for drawing and painting and doing quick touch-ups to raster images. Up here at the top, we've got our selections like rectangle and our elliptical marquee. We also have a freehand lasso and a selection brush, and also a flood select, which is kind of our smart selection tools. Then we've got our painting tools like the pixel tool, the paintbrush, and erase tool. I mostly use the paintbrush, and that's what we're going to be using here in a moment. And we also have a flood tool. We've got our dodge and burn for making things lighter and darker. We've got a smudge brush tool, which is great for painting. We've got blur and sharpen. And then, of course, we've got the color picker, the view tool, which is for panning around the workspace, and our zoom tool, which we don't use those because we use keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to be painting with my drawing tablet here, but if you don't have a drawing tablet, that's fine. You can do most of this with a mouse just fine. So I'm going to switch to the brush tool. Let's select the rectangle and we'll click the mask layer button. That will add a raster mask that we can now paint on. So with that mask selected, I'm going to go into my brushes. For this, I'm just going to select one of these halftone brushes. I'm going to be using the halftone brush number 3. Let's go back to the layers panel. And I'm going to make this brush just a little bit larger. And if we look up here at the top, we've got lots of controls for this brush, including like wet edges and things for really detailed painting. Just like every other brush in Affinity Designer, we have a stabilizer. I'm going to leave that off for now. And if we tap more, this is going to give us all the controls we need for how our brush works with the pressure and tilt on our tablet. I'm going to leave these as default because I just want to brush a little bit of a mask onto this. So I'm just lightly brushing onto this, and you can see how it's revealing the image behind it. And the harder I press, the more halftone we get. And just that gives us a nice bit of texture in what is otherwise a pretty boring rectangle. Let's add a bit of texture to the text in the background as well. So I'm just going to select that image, click mask. That'll add a second mask in addition to the text mask. And let's change brushes. The brushes I'm going to be using for this, though, are in textures. So I'll just activate that. And again, we're going to be using brush pattern 03. To make this just a little bit larger, but I'm going to decrease the flow just a little bit so it's not too strong. And you get a little preview of what it's going to do when we brush over the text. I'm just going to lightly brush over some of the dark parts of the text. That does it for this second project of working with text in Affinity Designer. Before we wrap this tutorial up, though, there are a couple of final things I want to show you. First, let's go to Window and open the Resource Manager. Resource Manager is a really handy panel for getting information about all the files that you might have brought into Designer. By default, it embeds images. When we wrote this Barbara Kruger image into Designer, it actually embedded it in the file. We do have the option to make it linked, and that can be really handy if you have lots of reference images and you don't want to deal with a really huge Designer file, or your system just doesn't have that much memory. You can also use linked images if you're doing a lot of work in Affinity Photo and you want those changes to automatically update in Affinity Designer. Clicking on this, you get quite a bit of information about the linked asset as well. We get the name, the status. If the file has been moved, for instance, the status will show up as not okay. If we expand this out here, we can see that there are 2 copies of that file, and it also shows us which artboard they're on. It shows us the placement is embedded, the size of the file, and then also the placed DPI. Since I made those images quite a bit larger than their actual size, with a very low DPI, just 63 DPI. So not great for print. We also have some information about the image out here, like the original DPI of 72. And we can find that in Finder if we want to. Since it's embedded, it's just going to show us the location of our saved Affinity Designer file. For linked images, you can click Collect, and if you have images kind of scattered throughout your system in different folders, it will bring them all together and put them in one folder for you. And then you also have the Make Linked button, which means you can take an embedded file like this, click Make Linked, and it will just separate it out from your Affinity Designer file. Let's go ahead and close this and go back up to Window and go to Assets. So for instance, we've got this little sound MIDI keyboard looking thing. We can drop it here. And this is not just a raster PNG, but this is actually fully editable vector artwork that we can bring in here and customize, change the colors, change the position, whatever we want to do with it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. As you work in Affinity Designer, having access to assets like this really speeds things up. And you can even go on stock sites like Envato, get great assets, and then add them to your library here so that you can quickly just drag them into your project without having to manage them in Finder or Explorer. That concludes our course on Affinity Designer 2. As always, if you found that helpful or you learned something new, liking and subscribing really helps us out. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I will try to get back to you as quickly as I can. You can also reach out to me personally at moonlab.studio or drewmaxstudio.com. Until next time, I've been Drew and I will see you in the next video.